Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Joel Studebaker, and I am here to introduce Karla Bailey-Smith, who's joining us tonight for a virtual town hall. I'm really excited about this. I am a big fan of Karla's and have been for a long time. I was so excited that she was going to be running for uh, State House, and right as I moved into her district too. I'm very excited to be able to vote for her. And so tonight we're here to hear from her and a panel that she's assembled so that we can discuss why it's important to vote and what that means for us as a community, especially in such trying times. So I just want to give kind of a breakdown of how things are going to go tonight. So one, you'll notice that there's only a few people who have video and microphones tonight. As the night progresses, there will be opportunities for folks to ask questions. And as you kind of raise your hand by typing into the chat box, we'll be calling on folks who have a question to ask. And at that point, I will give you the opportunity to speak, but otherwise everybody will be muted for the duration of the event. If you're not familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of your window, there's a button that says chat. If you don't see it, you might need to click on the three dots that say more, and then click on the button that says chat. At that point, you'll be able to message us. You won't be able to see the messages everybody else is sending, but we'll be able to read your messages, don't worry, and we'll make sure to take note of those. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Karla Bailey-Smith, running for Illinois State House in District 88.
Thank you, Joel. And Joel, as I start talking, I'd appreciate it if you would try to see if you could broadcast this to my Facebook page. So have at it, see if it works. Yes, if you haven't met me before, I'm Karla Bailey-Smith, and I'm running for state representative in Illinois District 88. I am self-employed, I'm a mom, and I'm passionate about changing the face of representation in Springfield and passionate about creating positive change and giving a voice to those who have not been heard or represented in the past 20 years. When I started this campaign and I was looking at whether or not I could actually win, it was clear to me that the key to winning is engaging new voters and people who haven't been voting. I want to earn your vote. So I chose Why Vote as the theme for a series of town halls focusing on different policies that affect our daily lives. It's very easy to pay attention to the presidential elections, but local elections actually impact us more directly. And today we're going to talk about why. Our first panelist is Elizabeth Fox Anvick, who is on the school board for District 87 in Bloomington. We've got Elizabeth, and she's unmuted, so I will say welcome, Elizabeth.
Hey, thanks for having me, Karla.
Yeah. So the school board elections happen in the spring, so that's not in November. But I asked Elizabeth here today so that she could tell us why we should pay attention to the school board elections and what exactly does the school board do? So
Sure.
take it away.
Thanks. So actually the school board's main being is to set the policies for the district that the school board is overseeing. So in my case, I'm in District 87, so I'm on the District 87 school board, and we set the policies that then everything comes out of the policies that are set. So if it doesn't match a policy, then obviously rules or whatever academic achievements and things like that can't happen, right? But probably the thing that people most care about is that one of the roles of the school board is also to manage the finances of the school district. And in the state of Illinois, school districts get their funding from five primary income sources, which includes local property taxes, county sales taxes, funding from the state, funding from the federal government, and then borrowing that the district may choose to do, like through long-term debt or bonds that they may issue. And within the state of Illinois, local property taxes make up the biggest piece of the pie for the budgets that the school districts have. And as part of the process, the Board of Education adopts a tax levy, which is what affects the tax bills for everybody within the district's governing. So like there's certain, you could live in Bloomington and not be in the District 87 taxing body, because you could be part of the Unit 5 taxing body. But yeah, so in the fall, we set the tax levy, and then we pass that on to the county clerk's office, and then she's the one then that acquires, take in charge of collecting the taxes, and then distributes them back to us. And it's usually, I think, about 18 months after we've passed the levy that the actual tax dollars for that levy then come in. So I think for a lot of reasons, people most care about what's happening on the school district just because of the tax implications that they have. But on the flip side, the other reason why people should care about what goes on in the schools is for that very reason. You know, what kind of future citizens are the districts turning out, you know, and public education is such a vital part of and what I think makes America cool. And that, you know, we have a, you know, a philosophy that we want to educate everybody, right? It's not, public education is open to everybody.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Well, thank you. So another question that I had was when District 87 decided to close the schools due to the pandemic, they had already been using short-term e-learning. And I was curious if the school board received guidance or support from the state level with regards to moving everybody to that e-learning.
Right. So actually, District 87 had already, as a policy that the board voted on in the fall, we had already authorized the district to institute e-learning days. And at that time, we weren't thinking for pandemic reasons. We were thinking in case of weather, right? And we had actually, so we officially adopted a policy around it in the fall. So that prepared us a lot better to be able to handle what happened here this spring. So that was cool. And we actually had a trial run of it last year. If you remember when we had the really cold snap and you know, we had the -50 degrees. That was when we actually tried out e-learning for the first time. So we had actually had, you know, put the training wheels on last year, learned a lot of things, had a lot of great feedback from parents and teachers and even students within the district. And that allowed us to make some tweaks to it. And then this year, we, like I said, so we passed the policy, and then so every kid in District 87 was prepared for one snow day, one emergency day, let's say, before all of this started. But that kind of gave us a leg up. And in terms of the school board getting direction, our only job in this whole was making sure that, you know, the e-learning days would be able, by passing the policies really. But I will say the Illinois State Board of Education, the Illinois Association of School Boards, the Illinois Association of Principals have put out a lot of information to help districts prepare and handle this unusual time that we're living in right now, right? And actually District 87, I'm very proud of them, because we had kind of tested it out last year and this year. We actually were reached out to from some surrounding school districts and asking for some hints and tips that we could offer because, and I'm very proud of all of the staff and teachers in District 87 and how they have worked very, very hard to make it so successful. It's been really cool to see. Of course, everybody would rather be in their classrooms right now, but in these times, they're making it work, and that's pretty cool.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear that. So I also wanted to ask, since we are talking about voting and choosing our elected officials, what made you decide to run for school board? When did you get elected, and do you think you'll run again, and when would that be?
Yeah, so I was elected in April of 2017. And so my term's actually ending in a year. And I do plan to run for re-election, I hope. And I come from a very long line of educators. My parents are educators. Well, and I should say, my wife is an educator. My in-laws are all educators. So everybody in my life is a teacher. So I thought, you know, what can I do to help give back to the educational system? And running for school board was one of those things. And I really wanted to make sure that everybody got to feel like they had a voice through me by me sitting on the board. So that's kind of what was driving my desire. And now we have 2 kids too in District 87. So it felt all the more kind of reason to do it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your service.
Oh, anytime.
And all right. Well, thanks. Oh, wait. Before that, Joel, were there any questions from the chat box for Elizabeth before we move on to the higher education people?
We haven't seen any yet, but if you have any questions for Elizabeth, then go ahead and drop them in the chat box now. And if you think of any, Elizabeth, will you be staying on? Will you maybe be able to answer some of the chat box?
Yep.
Okay,
I can.
thanks so much.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so next up we have Lea Cline, who works at ISU teaching art history, and Paul Resnick, who is an educator with Illinois Central College. And they're going to come on together because they are both in higher education. And let's see, what were my questions? How was I going to start this one? Right. So Paul and Lea, I would like for you to tell us ways that policy decisions from state and local governments affect our higher education institutions.
Are we unmuting ourselves?
Yeah, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Lea Cline, and as Karla said, I'm a professor at ISU, and I'm a candidate for McLean County Board in District 8. And I appreciate you having me here to talk about this issue. And I think there are a couple of things that kind of jump to my mind as sort of first and most critical things to be thinking about. On the local level, you know, the county board doesn't have a tremendous effect on the school districts. But they do have some influence on taxing and some influence on the dispersion of those taxes. But in terms of higher education, you know, Paul and I have had a bit of a conversation. I'm sure he'll pop in here too. But you know, one of the things that I'm most interested in terms of elections locally is that I think we have an obligation to treat our students as citizens of this community. And there has been, I think, a trend probably for a lot longer than I've been around of treating the students at ISU and IWU as sort of tax dollars on legs, you know, coming in and spending money and then leaving. And I think it's important for us as county board members, those who are on the county board, and people in all levels of elected office, at least in McLean County, to consider and to think about these students as residents and a citizen, right? So this is not a policy or a law or something that can be passed, but it's an attitude. And I think that attitude is significant and important when we think about our population in this county, right? We have a lot of higher education going on in the county, kind of broadly. And Paul, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then I won't dominate, but you and I have a shared discussion, I think, also about MAP grants.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Karla for having me on today to talk about education. I'm really appreciative of that. But to go right to your question on policy decisions affecting our schools. So we used to have a funding formula of 1/3 property tax, 1/3 tuition, and 1/3 state funding. And we've seen over a number of years this amazing disintegration of state funding, whereas where state funding isn't even, even into the equation anymore. So the fact, Karla, that you're running for office, that you're running for state senator position, that you are a big advocate of education, we need more people like you running, because that state money just evaporated. And so with this now COVID-19, the term at risk has taken on even bigger meaning for our two-year colleges, because not only was it before in terms of developmental classes, and can we get these students into developmental, but now the at-risk has taken on a larger meaning of, well, do they have a job? Do they have a home? Do they have basics that we hadn't thought about before? So it's really a crisis. Of course, it's a crisis on a health level, but now for the two-year college, at-risk has taken on a lot larger meaning. So we have to keep that in mind. Our credit hour is $155 a credit hour, which doesn't seem like a lot of money, but for our at-risk students, for our low-income students, that's $4,600 a year if they go full-time. That's a lot of money. A lot of my students are working just to keep food on the table or a roof over their heads. On top of that, $4,600. So my point is I'm glad you're running in terms of, could we even bring back the 1/3 formula that we used to have from the state? And then Lea and we had a really interesting discussion on MAP. And if Lea, you want to start us in on MAP, and I can fill us in as well.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think we can possibly all agree on is that we have a really great governor right now. We have a champion for education, both in terms of primary, secondary, and higher education in all of its forms. And so I have every belief that the governor is interested in remedying this issue and the sort of funding issue, but we need as much support as possible in the state House and Senate. The issue of MAP grants, Monetary Assistance Program grants, for me is a really important one. And I know that the governor has made some gestures towards MAP grants, and I think possibly intended to do more, but with the current crisis that we're in, I think the budget is sort of
who knows?
Until we know what's happening. But monetary assistance grants, when they began in 2002, the MAP grants addressed Illinois citizens whose parents' combined income was either $35,000 or their personal income, if they were independent, $17,000. And if the student achieved appropriate levels in school, could receive a MAP grant for college. MAP grants at that time in 2002 covered the entirety of the average cost of tuition and fees for a student. Now, and my most recent data that I have is from 2018, it covers less than half of that. And so we hear lots of times we need to increase the number of MAP grants that are available. True, there are more than 300,000 students in the state of Illinois who would qualify for MAP grants, and we have less than half of those to give out, sometimes as low as 130,000 of those to give out. But there's also the issue of the quantity of the MAP grant. The MAP grant now at ISU, I have students who are working full-time jobs, who are MAP recipients, who are forced to work full-time jobs in order to compensate for not only the half of tuition and fees that they must pay, but also their living expenses, right? You have to have an apartment and food and transportation and the like. So we're burdening these students, right, in a way that the program at its inception did not intend to do. It was intended, in a sense, to do exactly the opposite of this. just some quick statistics and why I think it's so important for MAP grants. 56% of all MAP recipients are first-generation students. More than half of all African American and Hispanic students enrolled in schools in Illinois receive MAP. And again, I've kind of given you the 35,000 gross family income, 17,000 for independent students. This is exactly the kind of group that Paul was just. Students need our support, right? They need help, and their needs now are from, going from a constant trouble to now a real crisis, right? This is a crisis for them to survive. So in the State House, you can help to drum up support and support the expansion of the MAP grant program.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Paul, did you have anything else to add?
No, just that, I completely agree with what Lea is saying. I've seen some numbers, but every year ICC bills the state, and they don't know if or when they'll get the funding back for those particular students. So usually one time in the fall, we don't know when, one time in the spring, we don't know when. Of course, the disastrous year when Ronner, had no budget, it was disastrous for our students as well. So I would just add that there's always uncertainty in our financial aid department when it comes to MAP. Right.
Well, I'm so glad that I asked you both to come, because I've certainly learned a few things today about how I can be a good representative for everyone who's trying to seek higher education in Illinois, and I really appreciate that. I did want to point out to our audience, for those who don't already know, that Paul and Lea are both running for county board. Paul is running in Tazewell County, and Lea is running here in McLean County. Paul, would you like to tell us why you decided to run for county board?
Well, in 2016, we had a disastrous federal election, and suddenly my wife and I found ourselves marching in the streets, whether for science, whether against walls, and it just came from the grassroots. It's like, how can we get involved on a grassroots level and really be positive workers for political change in our country? And so luckily, I know the Tazewell County Dems here, and Brittany Miller approached me about running, and I thought, why not? And it's opened my eyes. It keeps opening my eyes, meeting wonderful people like you, but also learning more at the local level on how the county works, where our money goes, how it's spent, on and on and on. So my original motivation was the disastrous federal election, and feeling a need to get involved.
Right. And Lea?
Well, I think, similarly, I live in a district in Bloomington where I have been very lucky to have really good liberal representation for District 8. But when Carlo Robustelli announced that he was going to step down from his position, I suppose that if you'd asked me a year ago if I would ever run for public office, I would tell you were crazy. But I think, as Paul said, is that at some point we have to put our money where our mouth is, right? And the election, Donald Trump's election, for me was earth-shattering. And I had always been a participant as much as I could in the background of people's elections. And I've been an election judge for a number of years. So facilitating the election process was always very important to me. But it sort of, the opportunity presented itself, and I decided that I have I have the capacity to do the work, and so I should try, right? So it's one of those democratic processes, right? That it's a citizen-led government that we have, and so why not me, right? And I'm happy to be able to represent the faculty. Faculty make up a pretty reasonable percentage. Faculty and staff at our universities make up a pretty reasonable percentage of our community. And like Elizabeth, I come from I can't even count how many teachers and faculty members are in my family line, from rural teachers in Arkansas to universities, right? So it's sort of part of who we are, and I kind of grew up in a politically active family. So I'm happy to have the opportunity to run and the opportunity to represent the interests and the needs and the concerns of my neighborhood, right, my district, but also broadly speaking, the needs of our county.
Okay, thank you. I'm seeing some questions come up on the side. I think most of them might be for me. Joel, were there any questions for either, for Elizabeth or for Paul or Lea?
Yeah, so I see one definitely. Erin had asked, just to be reminded, Paul, she thought you were in the 3rd district. But
Yes.
to be sure.
Yes.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
And then Anthony, it looks like he had a question. Anthony, I'm going to allow you to talk. And so are you with us to ask your question? Anthony, are you with us?
Okay,
There he
yeah.
is.
Sorry, I don't have a camera on my laptop, so I have to
That's
use
okay.
my phone for both.
We can hear you.
So in addition to students, what is there anything that can be restored to the budget that was cut during Rauner for graduate students who, usually end up working as employees of the university and students and get paid starvation wages? So and are usually, at least in my collegiate experience, were almost essential to the teaching of the courses that I was in. So is there anything that can be restored to the state budget, or is there other than just giving more money, is there something that was taken out that can be put back in for grad students so that you don't hear these horror stories of grad students trying to survive on $20-$30 a week and stuff like this?
Yeah, good question.
Anthony, I'm writing the question down. I don't have that answer, but but it's an important question for me to look into, and I appreciate that. Lea, do you work with grad students, and do you have any insight?
I do work with graduate students, and Anthony, that's a great question, and I'm not sure. I'm not certain that there is anything in terms of budget appropriations at the state level that are so designated. I think that I believe I'm not speaking out of turn when I say that I believe that's a campus by campus decision, and how the administration facilitates its dispersion of funding. That being said, unionization, as has happened recently at ISU, is a really big and important step in terms of self-advocacy and setting the graduate students up in a way for the university, and not just ISU, but at every university. My graduate school at the University of Texas at Austin, the graduate students were not. They were not unionized when I was there, but they have now, and they are doing a lot better than I was doing when I was there. But to sort of see the graduate students as employees as much as seeing them as students, right? So
Right.
Do we treat them like students, or do we treat them like employees? And I think that's an important step. The unionization process is an important step. But Paul, please correct me if you know me to be incorrect, but I don't think that there are any state appropriations that specifically address the cause of graduate students in particular. I think that's a decision, and that's a process that happens campus by campus.
I think you're right, Lea. I'd support that.
And I absolutely support unions. And honestly, after this pandemic, I am fired up to get out there and talk to food service workers and people who, grocery store workers who should be in a union, who should have better protections, better health and safety, sick days, vacation days, paid sick days. So I'm looking forward to fighting that next fight, and the grad students.
Yeah. And the whole all the nurses and people that work in hospitals as well.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so Joel, were there any other questions that our educators could help us with, or do the rest of the questions look like they're primarily directed at me, for me?
I think the rest are directed at you, Karla.
Okay.
Did you want to go ahead and take those, or did you want to talk fair tax first?
If you, sorry. Oh, no. I'll do the fair tax at the end. I'll wrap up with that.
Hey, it looks like Zach has a question for me.
Oh, yes, he does. So, Zach, I am going to unmute you. Are you with us, Zach?
Okay, can you hear me?
We can't hear you.
Okay, so I mean, this is a question for both Lea and Karla, but I want to ask Lea since she's running for county board. There's, what do you think about the accountability and transparency issues that we have with the sheriff's offices across the state? They seem to be able to run their administrative functions with little impunity and actively work to make it more difficult to get basic information. So for instance, if I call them up and I ask them, what is your population? They tell me, oh, you have to FOIA that, which is a 5-day turnaround for like one specific number that should be easy to get. Or if I ask them a basic thing like, how much does it cost to keep a person in jail per day? They'll say, we don't give that information out. Even though, you know, I'm a tax-paying resident, I want to know that basic thing. Even if I FOIA it, they won't give it out. I mean, do you think that there is some serious accountability and transparency issues with the sheriff's office, at least the one in McLean County? And like, how do we address these specific issues?
Thank you, Zach. And I know that I think sounds like it goes to both Lea and Paul and their capacity they're running for on county board, and then also to Karla, because that obviously also has a lot to do with state code.
Well, if I know, Lea, if you want to say something, I would just say that running for county board in Tazewell County, I want as much transparency as possible, and that includes the sheriff's office. A big chunk of our budget goes to the sheriff's department. And so I want to know how that money's used. I want accountability and I want transparency. And I wouldn't accept I wouldn't accept an answer like that saying, you know, you got to do, you know, a Freedom of Information Act kind of thing on any citizen. I would not accept that as a board member. I would talk to the sheriff and talk to the people in the office and make sure that we have as much transparency as possible. And I'd want to know those answers too without being given the rigmarole. So that's how I would respond, Zach.
And I mean, likewise, and this of course came up in the primary election, and I've started this conversation with a few people in the county. Obviously, some of this has been interrupted by more pressing and immediate concerns. But the issue of overall transparency in McLean County is a really important one. I think, as you know, Zach, our sheriff really has had the leeway, let's say that, has had the leeway to act in ways that I don't think would necessarily fly if he didn't have a majority Republican board. So I think there are a lot of things that we can do to increase transparency generally. And when I inquired about one of the questions you asked me about getting access to prisoner records, the immediate response was that that they were going to look into it and talk about how the county court records come into the county, right? So some of this has to do with how the courts facilitate the input of information, as much as it has to do with how the county then distributes that information. So there's a lot to work on in that. But I think, you know, for me, one of the things that this coronavirus situation that we find ourselves in has kind of had a happy result is that there was always resistance on the county board to be super transparent with their meetings and publicizing, recording, and sort of publishing online the proceedings of all of the meetings in video sort of context. And now somehow magically we know how we can do that, right? Now we know it can work. And so they very quickly, I give them credit, very quickly got into a position where they were able to make available everything from these smaller committee meetings on up, right? There's still a major problem with community involvement. That is, it's still a 24-hour waiting period in order to be involved. But I think some of these kind of traditional reticence towards transparency have been obliterated by the circumstances. And I think we can capitalize on that moving forward. I don't know, Karla, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Lea. I do want to say absolutely 100% I am behind criminal justice reform, and that includes taking a good hard look at what we allow our sheriffs to do across the state of Illinois. Not every sheriff is a bad guy or woman, but our sheriff seems to be particularly adept at keeping the decisions that he makes and the finances, the amount of money he has and what he's doing with it. There should be complete transparency with what that money is, where that money is going. Where does the bail money go? What is he doing with the bail money? What is he doing with the $7 for 15 minutes for video conferencing that it costs our inmates to stay in touch with their family members, even during this crisis? So I don't know how much I could do from the state legislature level with regards to the sheriff, but I will definitely be looking into it.
Thank you, Karla. And I know you just mentioned the issue of that video conferencing, which has been kind of a hot topic at the county level. And just, we had a question about that as well in chat. And this was specifically to Lea about, supporting a shift in the way that we manage that video conferencing. I just wanted to see, we've had a few questions specifically about kind of the local response to COVID-19, and if any of the three of you had anything you'd like to add on that.
Can you either allow somebody to ask the question out loud, or can you pull some of the information out for us, please?
Yes, just a second here.
Well, I can see the question, if you want me to, as you're doing that, Joel, I can see the question from Robert. The question was about the contract for video conferencing for the vendors. To the extent that I would be able to, right? That decision, at least the most oversight on that decision is at the Justice Committee. So it depends on what committee any board member is placed on. But what I can tell you is that certainly all of the Democratic members that I know and candidates that I know have talked about this either loosely or in response to what we've been reading and seeing with these kind of community responses, that we would definitely be in support of that. Now, to the extent that I could personally have a major influence on the contract, I don't know, because I don't know whether it's exactly how that contract is drawn up, because that's not transparent to me at this point. But I would absolutely be in support of reducing fees in general, but also having emergency exceptions to those fee rules, which other jails seem to be able to manage right now. So there must be a way. So I would be in support of that for sure, Robert.
Okay, and I did see a comment from Zach that state law is what guarantees the sheriff so much impunity. So I'm gonna check that out. Thank you. Were there any other questions?
Yep, we have one follow-up question from Zach, and I think that will round out our Q&A time for the night.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, so Leah, I think my follow-up question is, what do you, one, I can get you a copy of the current contract if you'd like, if you don't have it, with the phone company at the jail. And two, what do you think of the current handling of the jail amidst the COVID-19 pandemic? As of, I want to say, earlier this week, we have 160 people, inmates currently in there, plus the 140 workers that the sheriff says are essential and have to go there. So what do you think about this situation? What do you think the sheriff should be doing?
Oh, mute, unmute.
Oh, sorry, I was trying to follow the rules. So thank you for the offer of the contract. I'd be happy to see that. The contract itself, though, the issue would be when that can be renegotiated, right? So what is my feeling about how the jail, the situation with the jail? I think most people probably on this call, I watched the county board meeting recently where the sheriff kind of defiantly presented his view that everything's perfect, obviously, and that his solution is to put prisoners into 23-hour lockdown every day. And I think that this is tremendously troubling because that's essentially, putting people either in closer contact with one another or distancing them and forcing solitary confinement on them for no poor behavior. So this is a troubling issue. And of course, the workers who are forced by their employment to be there, it's a real risk. Now, of course, the sheriff wanted to say, and again, I'm just, right now I'm a candidate, right? I'm not on the board and I don't have influence on the board right now. But what I understood was from his presentation was that he believes that, that everybody who's in there is dangerous, right? And really kind of push back on this idea that, that this group, your group really wants to release, violent murderers and criminals into the public. And that's just not true. So were I on that committee, I would have given him more pushback because he got almost no pushback during that question and answer series. Just a lot of praise, but he misrepresented the concerns that the community has and really kind of was very defiant, and it was very troubling because he seemed to show very little compassion or concern about the health of anyone, his prisoners or his staff. So that's something that, were I in the position, I would have certainly pushed back, but I don't think that 23-hour lockdown is the answer, and including consistently requiring the jail staff and the services to go on without really us knowing, I think, what their PPEs, what kind of protection they may have. So it's a concern. It's definitely a concern.
Thank you, Leah. And I also wanted to make sure, Erin, you had asked, you said, please let me know if there are questions I should ask of the Tazewell County Sheriff's Department regarding COVID-19. I can do that tomorrow. And Paul just wanted to make sure that you were able to email him. And so I'll make sure that we get that email to you in chat so that you're able to reach out and get in contact with him. Karla, I haven't seen any other questions come in, and so I think we addressed our Q&A section.
All right. Well, thank you to all of my two educators and to my school board member for joining us tonight, and thank you for everybody who showed up to listen and participate. And I just wanted to wrap up this evening with a reminder that in November, we will have a referendum on the ballot to pass a fair tax. And Joel, could you, if you have that flyer handy, if you could throw that up so people could see the basics. So if passed, the fair tax will provide critical funding for schools. The fair tax only increases taxes on people earning more than $250,000 a year, which is just 3% of our population. The other 97% of us should see tax relief. So that's another reason to vote. Unfortunately, I learned recently that a lot of times in presidential elections, we do get a much higher turnout, but sometimes people just vote for the president and they don't pay attention to anything else on the ballot, be it their state representative, their county board members, or the referendums. So it's up to all of us to help educate our friends and family and get the word out about how important it is to vote. And so again, thank you all for attending today. And if you need any information about support and resources during this COVID-19 crisis, we have information available at my campaign website, unite88.org. You can register your email with us so that you can stay up to date with our series of town halls. And we welcome donations so we can continue voter outreach using digital platforms and the U.S. Postal Service. We want to keep them in business. Good night and be well.
Thank you, Karla.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
Lea.
you.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.